Liam's boots scraped against the gravel as he walked toward the last crate at the back of the auction. The faint hum of whispers from the crowd faded in his ears. He could barely hear the auctioneer's voice over the wind, but one word lingered in his mind: rejected. The dog inside the crate looked up from beneath the wire bars, its yellow eyes dull with weariness. The auctioneer made another attempt to sell it, but no one seemed interested. The dog's thin frame and visible limp seemed to carry an invisible weight, a past that no one wanted to acknowledge. Liam's heart clenched. He knew what it was like to be overlooked, to feel invisible, to be ignored by the world because of something people couldn't understand. Without thinking, he raised his hand. The crowd hushed, a mix of confusion and disbelief in the air. $5, the auctioneer said, looking as if he didn't care either way. And he won. The crowd remained silent, glancing anywhere but at the dog. No one wanted to waste their money on something broken. $5. The auctioneer repeated, clearly ready to be done with the whole ordeal. Liam's hand stayed raised. The auctioneer's eyes flicked at him, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as the gavel fell. Sold. Liam stepped forward, his pulse quickening. He felt an odd sense of urgency, like if he didn't act now, this poor creature would be forgotten forever. He knelt down in front of the crate, and the dog didn't move, just stared at him with an almost defeated expression. The auctioneer, still in a hurry to move on to the next lot, quickly handed Liam a clipboard and a pen. "She's been through a lot," he said flatly. "No one's been able to keep her. Broken leg, afraid of everything. Good luck with her." Liam's fingers trembled slightly as he signed the paperwork, and when the dog was finally released from the crate, she took a few hesitant steps toward him. Her fur was matted, and her ribs were visible beneath the fur. She smelled like dirt and fear. She looked up at him, and for the first time since Liam had seen her, something inside her eyes shifted. There was a faint flicker of trust, or perhaps it was just the tiniest bit of hope. He crouched down and spoke softly. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. Let's get you home." The dog didn't move at first, but after a long pause, she took a cautious step forward. Liam smiled as he gently reached out and petted the top of her head. She flinched but didn't pull away. That was enough for now. As he led her toward his truck, a few people stared at them, muttering. "Waste of money," someone said. "That dog's too broken to save." But Liam didn't hear them. The world had already written Rosie off, but he wasn't about to do the same. This wasn't just a dog. This was a second chance. And for the first time in a long while, Liam felt like he might be the one to give it. Liam's truck rumbled down the dirt road as he drove home, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound in the cab. Rosie, the dog he had just purchased for a mere $5, sat curled up on the passenger seat, her head resting on her paws. She hadn't moved much since they left the auction yard. Her large eyes were fixed on the floor, as if she was trying to make herself disappear. Liam glanced at her from time to time, his grip on the steering wheel tight. He could feel the weight of her past in the air between them. People didn't just give up on animals like that without a reason. He could see the fear in her, the wariness of everything around her. She had been abandoned, discarded, and Liam knew it would take time before she'd trust him, or anyone again. When they pulled into his driveway, Liam turned off the engine and sat for a moment. His small house, tucked away in the woods, was peaceful, the perfect place for someone who wanted to get away from the noise of the world. But even here, there would be challenges. He had no idea how to heal the wounds this dog carried, but he promised himself he would try. Rosie deserved that much. He opened the door slowly, trying not to startle her. Rosie didn't move, not at first. It was as if she was frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. Liam reached over, gently unbuckling her seatbelt, and with a soft, coaxing voice, he said, "Come on, Rosie. Let's go inside." The dog shifted, her paws clicking on the floor as she carefully climbed out of the truck. She walked cautiously up the front steps, her tail low, eyes darting around at every sound. Liam followed her inside, his footsteps quiet as he closed the door behind them. The inside of the house was modest but welcoming. Wooden floors, old furniture, and a kitchen that smelled of coffee and the faint scent of grease from his mechanic work. Rosie stood still in the middle of the living room, unsure of where to go. Liam didn't rush her. He set down a bowl of water in front of her and gently nudged a bowl of food closer. "It's yours," he said, sitting on the couch across from her. Rosie didn't move toward the food. Instead, she curled up in the corner, her body trembling slightly. Liam sighed, but he didn't push her. This was going to take time, he reminded himself. He learned patience the hard way in his own life. He could give her that. "All right then," Liam muttered to himself, standing up. "We'll take it slow." He grabbed his old worn-out book and settled back into the couch. "No pressure, Rosie. Just be here when you're ready." The night passed quietly. The soft rustle of pages filled the room, and Rosie eventually moved closer, her head inching toward the food bowl. She sniffed at it for a long moment, but still, she didn't eat. Instead, she simply lay there, close to him, but not too close. A truce of sorts. A beginning. Liam smiled softly to himself. "Tomorrow, Rosie. We'll try again tomorrow." And as the night grew darker, the young man made a promise to the dog that would change both of their lives forever. He wouldn't give up on her. Not ever. The first few days were quiet. Rosie remained distant, her eyes always watching Liam from a corner of the room. She would occasionally lift her head when he moved, but she never ventured far from her spot. The food he left for her went untouched, and the water bowl remained mostly full. Liam had been patient before, but this was different. There was something about Rosie that made him feel like he was walking on thin ice, unsure of what would happen next. Still, he didn't give up. Every morning, Liam made a point of talking to her, even if she didn't respond. He kept the atmosphere calm, turning on soft music in the background, making his movements deliberate and slow. He didn't want to startle her. He didn't want to make her feel like she had to run again. On the fourth day, something shifted. Liam was in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal when he heard the faint sound of paws padding on the floor behind him. He turned quickly, but Rosie had already stopped. She stood near the doorway, watching him with an intensity he hadn't seen before. For a moment, neither of them moved. Liam held his breath. "Hey there," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "You're getting closer. That's good." Rosie took a hesitant step forward, her head low, but her tail started to wag. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. Liam's heart skipped a beat. Encouraged, he crouched down, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. For a long minute, Rosie just stood there studying him. Her body was still tense, but the fearful look in her eyes had softened just a bit. She was letting him in. It was a fragile trust, but it was there. Liam reached out his hand, palm facing up, as though inviting her to come closer. Rosie's eyes flickered to his hand and then back to his face. It was a small thing, trusting him enough to consider coming closer. Another small step. She took a slow step forward, then another. The distance between them was closing, piece by piece. When she finally stood directly in front of him, she gave a soft whine, as if unsure what to do next. Liam didn't pull away. Instead, he stayed still, waiting. He could see how hesitant she was, how many times she had been let down before. But he wasn't going anywhere. "Good girl," he murmured, his voice full of quiet praise. Rosie's tail twitched, and for the first time, she leaned forward, just enough to touch his hand with the tip of her nose. The contact was gentle, almost shy, but it was a connection. Liam smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. He hadn't expected this kind of breakthrough so soon, but it felt like a turning point. The space between them had been wide, full of hurt and fear, but now it was starting to close. Rosie had made the first move, and it meant more than Liam could express. "See, it's not so bad," he whispered, his heart light. He gave her a gentle scratch behind the ears, and this time she didn't flinch. She stayed there, letting him. Slowly, her body relaxed. Her tail wagged once more, and the soft sound of it hitting the floor filled the quiet room. The healing hadn't begun all at once, but this moment felt like a crack of light in the darkness. Rosie wasn't fully healed, not yet. But this was the first step, and for both of them, it was everything. Weeks passed, and Rosie began to show small signs of progress. Liam was patient, never rushing her, always letting her take things at her own pace. She started eating more regularly, though still not with much enthusiasm. The faint glimmer of trust in her eyes grew stronger every day, but she remained quiet, her movements slow and cautious. The first real breakthrough came one afternoon when Liam was working in the garage. His hands were busy with a car engine, grease staining his fingers, the familiar hum of tools clanging as he worked. Rosie was in her usual spot, a corner by the door, lying on a faded blanket. She'd started to venture into the garage more often, always sitting near him, but never quite coming close enough to be touched. It was progress, but Liam knew she wasn't ready for much more yet. That day, a new customer pulled up, an elderly woman with a beat-up sedan. Liam wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to greet her. As soon as she saw him, she began to talk, her voice raspy but warm. "Car's been making a funny noise. Thought I'd give you a try." The woman started to explain the issue with her car, but Rosie, as if on cue, stood up from her blanket and began to move toward them. Liam didn't think much of it at first, but then he saw Rosie's eyes lock onto the elderly woman's face. Without hesitation, Rosie padded over to the woman, her movements tentative but purposeful. She stopped right in front of her, tail wagging slowly. The woman froze, startled. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice softening. Rosie didn't shy away. She just stood there, gently sniffing the woman's shoes. The woman bent down, hesitating for a moment before extending her hand. To Liam's surprise, Rosie leaned in, her nose touching the woman's palm, a soft, trusting gesture. Liam watched, unable to hide the smile spreading across his face. Rosie was warming to people, slowly but surely. It wasn't the dramatic change he had hoped for, but it was a start. He had no idea why Rosie had chosen this woman out of everyone she had met, but it was undeniable. There was something about her that Rosie responded to. The woman straightened, a chuckle escaping her lips. "Well, looks like I've got a new friend." Rosie wagged her tail harder as though agreeing. Liam shook his head, amused by the unexpected bond forming between the two of them. As the woman settled into the waiting area with her car, Rosie stayed by her side, her presence calm and comforting. The soft sound of her tail thumping against the floor made the whole garage feel warmer, more inviting. When the car repairs were finished, the woman smiled, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "I'll bring you some cookies next time," she promised, ruffling Rosie's fur before leaving. That evening, as Liam sat at the table with his dinner, Rosie curled up next to him, her head resting on the floor. He scratched behind her ears, marveling at how far they'd come. She was starting to understand the world wasn't always out to hurt her. She was beginning to trust again. Liam looked down at her, his voice barely a whisper. "You're doing great, Rosie, one step at a time." And for the first time, he believed it. They were both healing together. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth it. By the time summer rolled around, Rosie had become more than just Liam's companion. She was a quiet fixture of his garage. People would come for an oil change or a new tire, but they stayed longer than they needed to, drawn in by the calm, soothing presence of the dog who had slowly learned to trust again. Rosie was no longer confined to the corners. She now lay near the workbench, her eyes following Liam's every move, tail thumping softly against the floor as he worked. It wasn't just the regulars who noticed. The once solitary garage, tucked away on the outskirts of town, had started to attract newcomers. Every now and then, someone would pop in just to meet the dog they'd heard so much about. They'd heard about Rosie's quiet way of making even the most nervous person feel at ease. It seemed impossible at first, but Rosie had become more than just a dog. She was a calming presence that everyone needed. One morning, as Liam worked under the hood of an old pickup truck, a young mother and her child walked into the garage. The little boy, no more than 6, clung tightly to his mother's side. His eyes were wide with uncertainty as he glanced around the space. The clatter of tools and the scent of oil filled the air. Liam saw the boy's nervous glance and smiled warmly. "Hey there, buddy. You scared of the noise?" The boy nodded, his tiny fists clenched tightly against his sides. His mother, clearly embarrassed, gave him a reassuring pat. It's okay, sweetie. We'll only be a minute. Liam wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward Rosie, who was lying quietly near the door. You know, that dog there doesn't mind the noise. She's been through a lot, but she helps people feel better. The little boy's eyes flicked toward Rosie, who was laying still, her ears perked up, as if she were listening carefully to everything around her. Liam stood up slowly, walking over to where the boy and his mother stood. You want to meet her? He asked softly. The boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his curiosity overcoming his fear. Liam led the boy over to Rosie, crouching down beside her. Rosie raised her head slowly, eyes meeting the boy's, and then she stretched out her paw in a soft, deliberate movement. The boy reached out tentatively, his small hand hovering near her paw. For a second, Rosie froze, as if testing the boy's intent. But when he gently touched her, she nudged his hand with her nose, a gesture of reassurance. The boy's face lit up in surprise, his tension melting away. Slowly he knelt down, and Rosie rested her head on his lap, letting him pet her. The boy's mother watched in amazement, her face softening. She's really calming him down, she said quietly. I didn't think anything could work today. Liam smiled, proud of Rosie. She has that effect on people. The mother stayed for a while longer, chatting with Liam as Rosie continued to lay by the boy's side, his hand gently stroking her fur. The atmosphere in the garage had changed. It was no longer just a place for mechanical work, but a space where hearts were healed. People came in for car repairs, but they left with something much more valuable, a sense of peace, a connection that wasn't there before. As the woman and her son left, she turned to Liam and said, Thank you. I think you've got the only mechanic in town with a therapy dog. Liam chuckled, shaking his head. I think Rosie's the one doing all the work. Rosie lifted her head slightly as they left, her tail giving a lazy thump. Liam patted her gently. You've got a gift, you know that. And in that moment, it was clear, Rosie wasn't just a dog who had been given a second chance. She was a quiet miracle, transforming lives without ever saying a word. It was a stormy afternoon when everything changed. The rain pelted down against the windows of the garage, and the wind howled as the trees swayed violently. The sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, louder with each passing minute. Inside, the garage was warm, lit only by the glow of the overhead lights and the steady hum of the small space heater in the corner. Liam was bent over the engine of a car, his hands busy with the usual repairs. Rosie lay near the back door, curled up on her blanket, her eyes half closed but alert. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a new arrival. Liam didn't look up at first, focused on his work. He knew it was probably another customer looking for quick repairs before the storm really hit. But then, he heard the sound of footsteps, hesitant and unsure, and a soft voice that reached in from across the room. Excuse me, is this the garage? Liam straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked toward the door, where a young girl stood, probably no older than 10 or 11. Her hair was tangled from the storm, her clothes drenched, and her face was pale with fear. She looked around the room nervously, her hands wringing together in anxious anticipation. Hey there, Liam said gently, walking toward her. What can I do for you? The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. She took a hesitant step forward and then stopped. I don't know, she said, her voice quivering. There was lightning. I got scared and The girl stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. Liam saw the unmistakable signs of panic in her expression. Nervous shaking, shallow breaths, and wide, unfocused eyes. The storm had unsettled her, and she was clearly overwhelmed. Hey, it's okay, Liam said, kneeling down to her level. You're safe here. It's just a storm, and it'll pass. But the girl didn't seem to hear him. She stood frozen, her hands clutching her arms tightly as the storm raged outside. That's when Liam noticed Rosie. The dog had been lying on her blanket in the corner, but now her head was raised. Her body was still, her eyes locked onto the girl. For a moment, the storm seemed to fade away, and the garage was filled with the quiet presence of the dog. Slowly, Rosie stood up and walked toward the girl, her movements deliberate but calm. The girl's eyes widened, her fear giving way to curiosity. She took a step back, her body still tense. But Rosie didn't stop. She took one more step forward, stopping just shy of the girl's outstretched hand. The girl hesitated, but Rosie stood there, tail low but steady, eyes kind. Liam watched the interaction, his heart swelling. This was it, the moment. Rosie wasn't just a dog anymore. She was becoming something far greater than that. Without a word, Rosie lowered her head, letting the girl reach out and gently stroke her fur. The girl's body relaxed, her breath becoming slower and deeper as she continued to pet the dog. The tension in her shoulders eased as Rosie leaned into the touch, her presence quiet and grounding. Liam stepped back, not wanting to interrupt the moment. He watched as Rosie helped the girl, calming her in a way that words never could. For the first time in a long while, the girl's face softened and a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The storm outside raged on, but inside the garage, everything felt still. The girl was no longer trembling. Rosie had worked her quiet magic again. As the girl stood there, still petting Rosie, Liam took a step forward. "You okay now?" he asked gently, his voice full of compassion. The girl nodded, her smile growing a little wider. "Yeah, I think I am. Thank you. Thank you for having her here." Liam smiled and nodded. "It's Rosie. She's the one doing all the work. But I'm glad she could help." The girl looked down at the dog, who now lay beside her, content eyes half closed as she basked in the comfort of the child's touch. "She's amazing," the girl whispered, her voice full of awe. And at that moment, Liam realized just how far they had both come. Rosie, the dog who had been abandoned, broken and alone, had become a source of light. She wasn't just changing lives, she was saving them, one quiet moment at a time. The days after the storm seemed brighter somehow. Rosie's calming presence in the garage became a comforting constant for both Liam and the people who visited. Word had spread, and more often than not, people would show up not just for car repairs, but for the chance to spend time with Rosie. She had become more than a dog. She was a silent healer, her quiet demeanor capable of soothing the troubled souls that walked through Liam's door. But one morning, things felt different. The air was thick with a kind of anticipation. Liam could sense that something was about to happen, something he hadn't expected. As he walked into the garage, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag, he saw Rosie sitting at the door, her eyes fixed on a figure standing just outside. Liam stopped for a moment, noticing the man who had pulled up in an old sedan. He wasn't a regular customer. His face was weathered, lined with age, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made Liam pause. The man looked down at the ground as he approached the door, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. "Can I help you?" Liam asked, his voice steady but curious. The man looked up, his eyes a mixture of pain and weariness. "I heard about the dog," he said, his voice rough, as though he hadn't spoken in days. I've been meaning to stop by." Liam raised an eyebrow. "What can I do for you?" The man took a deep breath, his eyes darting toward Rosie, who had risen from her spot at the door. She stood silently, her gaze unwavering as she looked at him. It was as if she had been waiting for him all along. I need help," the man said, his voice cracking slightly. "I lost my wife last year. She was everything to me, and I don't know how to move on." Liam nodded, sensing the weight of the man's words. "I'm sorry for your loss." The man's hands trembled as he wiped his face with a sleeve. "It's been hard. I thought maybe, just maybe, a dog could help, but I don't know how to trust anymore." Rosie, who had been watching the man carefully, took a cautious step forward. She didn't rush toward him, but her eyes were soft, inviting. Slowly she moved closer, as though sensing the man's pain. Her tail swayed gently behind her. The man stood motionless, eyes locked onto the dog. "I don't know if I can do this," he murmured. "I'm afraid." Liam watched the interaction, his heart heavy with understanding. Rosie, in her own quiet way, was doing what she did best, offering comfort without expectation, offering trust when it seemed impossible. Rosie's ability to heal wasn't about rushing in or pushing anyone. It was about being patient, gentle, and giving people space to heal in their own time. "Maybe she can help," Liam said softly, stepping aside to let the man approach. She doesn't ask for anything, just your time. For a long moment, the man didn't move. But then, slowly, his hand extended toward Rosie. The dog didn't flinch. She stepped forward and nuzzled his palm gently, her warm breath a soft reassurance in the silence of the garage. The man's shoulders sagged, and for the first time since he had walked in, a tear slipped down his cheek. He knelt slowly, and Rosie, as though sensing his sorrow, rested her head on his lap, staying close to him as if offering her own kind of silent comfort. Liam stood back, watching the quiet connection between the man and the dog. There was no need for words. Rosie had done what no one else could. She had brought someone back from the edge of his grief, if only for a moment. She had given him the touch of healing he hadn't known he needed. For the first time in a long while, the man's face softened, his body relaxing. He looked up at Liam, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words barely seemed enough. Liam simply nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. Rosie had done her work again. She had healed another broken heart. And in doing so, she had healed a part of him too. As the months passed, Rosie's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The dog who had once been wary of human touch, who had cowered in corners, had become an integral part of the community. Liam's garage, which had always been a quiet, solitary place, was now a hub of calm, healing energy. People came in for car repairs, but they stayed longer than necessary, drawn by Rosie's gentle presence. No one was in a rush to leave when Rosie was around. Her soothing energy had a way of making time slow down. But as Rosie's relationship with the world deepened, Liam's own life started to change as well. The weight of his past, the years of feeling disconnected, began to lift. There was something about watching Rosie help others, seeing her interact with people who were broken, just like she had been, that reminded Liam of the power of patience, love, and connection. In her, he saw a reflection of his own healing, and in a strange way, Rosie had taught him just as much as he had taught her. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the golden light filtered through the windows of the garage, a familiar car pulled up. It was the elderly woman who had first come to the garage months ago with the beat-up sedan. She had promised to bring cookies for Rosie, and Liam couldn't help but smile when he saw her carrying a basket. "Hey there." Liam greeted her, his voice warm with familiarity. "How's the car been?" "Running just fine, thank you." The woman replied with a twinkle in her eye. "But I've brought something special for that dog of yours, and I made sure to bake extra." The woman walked into the garage, Rosie's ears perking up as she heard the sound of footsteps. Without hesitation, the dog padded over to the woman, her tail wagging happily. The woman crouched down, offering Rosie a treat from the basket. Rosie took it gently, savoring the moment with a quiet joy. "I've been meaning to tell you," the woman said, her voice softer now. "My daughter's been going through a tough time. I told her about Rosie and how much she helped me. She's struggling with her own grief, and I think Rosie might be able to help her too." Liam's heart swelled with pride as he looked at Rosie, who was now lying beside the woman, content and relaxed. "She's got a gift," he said quietly. "A gift for making people feel seen." The woman smiled, nodding. "I think I'd like to bring her here next time. Maybe Rosie can help her in the same way." Liam watched as Rosie, ever patient, leaned into the woman's touch. There was something deeply moving about the way Rosie had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of so many others. In her quiet, unassuming way, she had become a catalyst for healing, a bridge between pain and peace, between loss and recovery. As the woman left, promising to return soon, Liam felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been a part of something bigger than himself, something that transcended the boundaries of ordinary life. Rosie had brought not only comfort, but also a renewed sense of hope to everyone who crossed her path. That evening, after the garage had quieted down, Liam sat at his workbench, looking over the tools scattered across the counter. Rosie lay beside him, resting her head on her paws. The stillness of the moment was peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, Liam realized that he wasn't alone. "Thanks for everything, Rosie," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You've made this place feel like home." Rosie lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. There was no need for words. She had already given him everything he needed. They had healed together in their own time, in their own way. And now they were ready for whatever came next. As the evening darkened and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Liam knew that this was just the beginning. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and together they would continue to touch hearts, heal wounds, and bring peace to those who needed it most. And in that moment, both Liam and Rosie understood. Sometimes the most unexpected relationships are the ones that change everything.